I recently finished watching the increasingly popular Making a Murderer show on Netflix and wanted to create a little podcast, a little wide-shot webcast, collecting my thoughts on the case. For those that don't know, the first episode or so documents the wrongful rape and attempted murder conviction of a man called Stephen Avery. He spent 18 years in prison before being exonerated by DNA evidence and was released in September 2003. He was innocent of that crime, and it was a pretty grave injustice as documented on the show. And it brings to light a range of problems with the justice system, from how eyewitness testimony, even from victims, can be manipulated and unreliable. How police can use confirmation bias, tunnel vision, and target someone while ignoring all other leads and basically make the evidence fit for the person that they already believe did it or want to convict for the crime. And it also reiterated the sad truth that a jury can simply make the wrong decision, especially when they've been misled because of some of these other issues. I've done jury duty myself, and it was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life, because the fate of somebody's life is in your hands. And sometimes people are just idiots. They don't understand what their role is, they're not looking at evidence objectively, they want to pick on things like, oh, I think he looked odd when he was on the stand, using pop psychology and body language and hunches, or simply wanting to get the process over because you want to go home and cook tea. Those are some of the things that I experienced. So you can imagine what it's like on a massive murder trial with a shady prosecution and people's opinions being corrupted by media coverage. It's quite scary. But what makes the Stephen Avery story so fascinating is that just 2 years after he was exonerated, when he was suing the county for $36 million, he was charged with the murder of a young woman.
25-year-old Teresa Halbach disappeared after taking a picture at the Avery property in Manitowoc County. Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey were arrested in relation to the disappearance. In the spring of 2007, both Dassey and Avery were tried and convicted of Halbach's murder.
The filmmakers got unprecedented access to the trial and local community. In fact, they were there when victim Teresa Halbach was still considered missing. They have footage of Avery's interrogation, the questionable confession of his low IQ nephew Brendan Dassey, and they were there during the trials and convictions and afterwards, which was eventually edited into the series. And a large percentage of viewers, perhaps many of you listening to this, have come away from the series believing that Avery was innocent once again, and that he and his nephew were framed by some of the same authorities that were involved in Avery's original wrongful conviction. The theory is that it's a combination of certain individuals trying to save their own reputations because of their failings in the first case, and saving the county from the $36 million lawsuit that would have crippled them because the insurance companies were not going to pay out, leaving the county to foot the bill directly. It's not surprising that viewers came away thinking that Avery was innocent, believing that Avery was innocent, because that's what the filmmakers intended. Laura Ricciardi and Moira Demos put most of their focus on Avery's defence, the plight of his elderly mother and father, the reactions of his family and loved ones. It was his personal story. They spent most of their time with the defence lawyers Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, restating their argument that basically the key evidence against Avery had been planted on the family property to frame him. And there was this conflict of interest because of the prior conviction. And however convincing it was to Netflix viewers, and I'm convinced to a certain degree, but when the actual defence argument was being made in the courtroom, it wasn't strong enough to convince the jury, and Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey both did go down for this. It's only really after the fact that a lot of people have become convinced of innocence.
The Netflix series Making a Murderer has hundreds of thousands in an uproar. More than 200,000 people have signed a petition on Change.org, and another 30,000 are asking for a presidential pardon for Avery and his nephew.
We wanted to present as many sides as we could, but at the same time, we also wanted to tell a compelling story.
The art of filmmaking and editing, picking and choosing which bits go where to tell the story, omitting or glossing over certain things while playing up other things. It's hard to make an unbiased video about something. I can attest to that with my experiences on the Wide Shut YouTube channel. You always get annoyed by the trolls and the people who write hateful comments or completely disagree with you and go on long diatribes. But sometimes it's also worrying when people 100% agree with you, because you don't necessarily know whether they've actually explored the topic themselves or have just accepted your narrative of events. Making a Murderer has created a large bandwagon of Avery supporters, and a portion of that bandwagon will have done nothing more than sit on the couch and watch Netflix. And I liken it somewhat to the various films about the West Memphis Three. In that case, 3 teenagers at the time were convicted of murdering 3 young boys in Arkansas, which was in the early 90s, and they were granted their release in 2011 under a bizarre agreement called an Alford plea. And none of that would have happened without these films. Celebrities got involved, millions of dollars were raised to fund their appeals, to pay for new experts to give different opinions on the forensics, to come up with other forensic evidence, most of which was actually pretty tenuous, like a single hair that was consistent with a certain amount of people in the population, which included one of the victim's stepfathers. But you know, hairs get there by secondary transfer. It's not conclusive at all. And when you dig into the case, you find that the Paradise Lost films and the newer one by Peter Jackson did gloss over a lot of stuff against the West Memphis Three. And they also seemed very willing to point the finger at other possible suspects, such as this victim's stepfather. Early on it was another stepfather, then by the 3rd film it was that stepfather. And they ruined people's lives with the same kind of flimsy circumstantial evidence and hearsay that they claim put the West Memphis Three behind bars to begin with. Interestingly, the filmmakers of Making a Murderer have admitted that they were inspired by the Paradise Lost series.
I mean, I think I'm remembering correctly that in our motel room the night before our first day of shooting, we were playing scenes from Paradise Lost. The whole Paradise Lost trilogy was an inspiration to us, both the filmmaking, for sure, and the fact that it demonstrated that there was an appetite. You know, I think the first film was nearly 3 hours, and then there was 2 more.
My issue with both of these cases is not that I'm certain of their guilt, and I think they should have been convicted. I believe there was enough doubt for Avery and his nephew Dassey to be acquitted. The prosecutions played heavily on the jury's emotions and ignorance. It was more about crafting a narrative that the jury could get behind rather than a true narrative. I mean, in Dassey's trial, they said the murder happened one way, and then in Avery's trial, they said it happened another way. They can't both be true. My concern is that a lot of people are certain of their innocence, which is not the same thing as being uncertain of their guilt. If you're not certain of somebody's guilt, then acquittal or a retrial are the reasonable solutions, because there's doubt. Their guilt has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. But having doubt does not necessarily mean they're actually innocent in reality. O.J. Simpson was not guilty, but was he innocent? You can have doubt of Avery's guilt and doubt of Avery's innocence at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. I don't know if he did it or not. I wouldn't be willing to convict him, but I wouldn't be shaking his hand and giving him a hug after he's acquitted. I personally think the focus should be on the system. It should be about doing things better. And I would be for an acquittal or a retrial or a reopening of the case, however that can happen. But that's from a legal sense. I don't want to jump on the cult of personality, the Steve Avery is innocent cult. You know, the Damien Eccles fan club. Let's all go and get tattoos like Damien and follow him on Twitter. In a hypothetical world, all of these people are still strong suspects in cold cases. They haven't been solved. Steve Avery is still a prime suspect. He specifically requested Halbach to come photograph the vehicle that was for sale. She had been there before and he came out in a towel and she found it creepy. Her vehicle was found partially hidden with the plates removed on his property with his blood and DNA inside. A key fitting that vehicle was found in his trailer with his DNA on it. A used bullet with Teresa's DNA on it was found in his garage, consistent with weapons he owned. Her charred bones and remains were found in a fire pit and other places on the property. And his only real alibi comes from his nephew, who implicated him in the crime. There's a lot going on there. To say the police planted it all? Maybe they did, but maybe they didn't. One of the smoking guns, one of the cliffhangers in the series that made viewers go, oh, maybe he is innocent, was when Avery's lawyers went to where the evidence was held from his previous case, and they found a pretty shoddy evidence box, and inside was a vial of blood, and the rubber stopper that closed that vial had a hole in it. They implied that somebody went in with a needle, poked a hole in, and withdrew Avery's blood to be planted in Teresa's car. When they asked the facility, do you withdraw blood this way? And they said, we don't do that. Right, they might not withdraw blood that way, but it's actually standard procedure to put the blood in that way, through the hole. It's standard for there to be a hole in these blood vials. So there's no smoking gun. There's no physical evidence that that blood was taken out of that vial. Much was made of the EDTA test. That's a preservative used in the blood vials. And if EDTA was found in his blood at the scene, then the upshot is that it was planted. The prosecution's expert said no EDTA was found after testing the blood at the site. So they said, well, it couldn't have been planted. And the defense expert said that it's possible even if there was EDTA, it wouldn't have been picked up by the test. So we're right back at square one. We still have Avery's blood in Teresa's car on his property with no solid evidence to suggest that it was planted other than a hunch. Then it suggested the car itself was planted on the Avery property because a police officer called Colburn called in the plates before the car was officially found. So the theory is he found it first, called in the plates to be sure, and then moved it to the Avery yard to be discovered by others. But there's no way of knowing whether he wasn't just double checking information he'd already been given. Teresa was already missing at that point. He could have just been double checking something he'd written down on a notepad. It's all very ambiguous. Could he have been in front of the missing vehicle when he made the call? Sure, he could have been. Was he? Who the hell knows? With the bullet in the garage, why was there no blood found in this garage? There was loads of items in this garage. It would have spattered everywhere. It's not possible to clean all that off. Maybe he just covered her in a tarp when he shot her and contained the blood, then used a bit of bleach for whatever was on the ground. And again, I'm not saying there aren't doubts. These cops had conflicts of interest. They shouldn't have been involved in the investigation to begin with. The trial was tainted to some degree. Dassey was certainly railroaded to some degree. But suggesting the brother did it because he looked odd, or the ex-boyfriend did it because he knew how to get into her voicemail, or saying there's no doubt the police did it, is just speculation. There are many possibilities, but I for one am not comfortable saying that Avery is innocent. I have some doubts that he's guilty, but that's not the same thing. So those are my general thoughts on Making a Murderer. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out because it's fascinating stuff. But I'll catch you another time on Wide Shut.